Hello, welcome to another Burgundy with Tweedy video. I don't recall if I have featured this particular vintage of Domaine Fourrier's Gevrey Chambertin before. Possibly I have. This is the 2011 vintage, and it was the first that I had from Domaine Fourrier some years ago. It was probably about 2015, was it? About 10 years ago when I first discovered this producer, and this was the first vintage that I'd had from them, so it's a little bit nostalgic for me, I suppose. Serving temperature of this is not ideal. The place my friend is staying in has underfloor heating, and I don't think I'd thoroughly sort of acknowledged that when I arrived. And I put my bag down on the floor, and when I picked this out of the bag a few minutes ago, or perhaps half an hour ago, I realised it was actually a little bit warm, and so I put it in the fridge for a little bit to try and rectify that. And if this first glass is indeed still too warm, then it will go back in the fridge for a bit longer. It smells all right. The stemware is less than ideal. This is just what came with the holiday let. Oh well. Doesn't taper in enough at the top. As always, the lighting conditions here are far from perfect, but what I'm always reminded about with Domaine Fourrier's Gevrey Chambertin, at least, is how pale it is. It's relatively pale. It is a producer that tends to do a fairly light extraction on the grapes, so you don't get a very sort of deep, thick sort of wine. I don't think I've had a lot else from 2011 apart from this Gevrey Chambertin, so I wouldn't be able to comment on what the vintage was like overall, but certainly not thick, black and jammy. It's sort of a relatively pale side of the spectrum. Again, far from perfect stemware. It's going sort of floral and quite rose sort of floral, but it's quite dried rose petals. I think there's a certain amount of perhaps potpourri there. This probably needs a little while to wake up. I imagine an hour from now this will probably come into its own, particularly when the temperature has got down to where it should be, and the wind chill that is probably making it difficult to hear me right now may help. But once we get beyond that dried rose petals, sort of potpourri, the fruit is just about starting to wake up now. It's cherry, but it's cherries that have been, I wouldn't want to quite say cooked, but cherries, again, perhaps dried cherries. We have dried rose petals, dried cherries here. And there is a sort of seriousness to it that's almost slightly sanguine now, almost slightly sanguinous, I should say, rather than sanguine. That's a different word, isn't it? Sanguinous, slightly bloody, slightly meaty sort of seriousness to it. And probably extending on from that, there is a slight earthiness and a little bit of something like sous-bois, maybe. A fair amount of mushroom, actually. Now I think about it, that meatiness, bloodiness is probably... There is a mushroom, isn't there? Is it called the beefsteak mushroom or the chicken in the woods or something like that? There's a mushroom that sort of bleeds when you press it, and it has that sort of slightly bloody, slightly mushroomy quality. It's not as ethereal and light and delicate as I remember it. This is starting to go a little bit sort of interestingly intense. On the palate, still has a wonderfully pretty, actually quite light, actually quite delicate cherry character, and very, very silky, and barely a hint of tannin, the wispiest of tannins. They're really, really ethereal, soft, delicate, subtle. Perhaps with a bit of mulling over, there is then a little bit again of that slightly sanguinous, slightly earthy, slightly mushroomy sort of quality to it on the palate there as well. But at least initially, still some really lovely, fresh, delicate, dainty fruit. Still quite a lot of acidity there, which is a good sign. Isn't yet giving up. I have a feeling some of these village level Gevrey Chambertins from Fourrier are actually getting towards the end of their drinking window. I have a stock of about one bottle each from 2011 onwards, and I think some of them are actually at a point where I should really be drinking them sooner rather than later. Jancis Robinson has published drinking windows for just about all of these, and that's the sort of gold standard I was going by. Of course, you know, they're only estimates, and even the experts like Jancis Robinson don't always get it absolutely right. It doesn't guarantee that something will be undrinkable if it goes beyond that window. I think this probably really needs to drop down a little bit in temperature, and it does need also a little bit of time to breathe. There is a little bit of kind of severity almost on the nose there, that kind of dried flowers, dried rose petals, and I feel as though possibly with a bit of time to air, a bit of time to breathe, that will soften and become more delicate and more, perhaps even slightly fresher and more appealing. But the mouthfeel and the palate is pretty nice from the outset. Actually, it's really quite dainty. Very nice to be enjoying it in this unique setting. A little bit post sunset now, but very nice spot to enjoy a glass of Gevrey Chambertin. I suppose off in the distance there, I would theoretically have a view of France as well. Cheers.